Crusade Explorer, and Bubonic Score. I am, as always, your host, Christopher Paul Dugdale, MEDMA. We are at Duncanville High School, kind of, in these United States, and today is September 10th, 2020. On this date in history, uh, well, 19 years ago, tomorrow will be 9/11. And that was the day whenever terrorists hijacked four planes and crashed them into targets in New York, Washington, D.C., and Pennsylvania. So today's going to be pretty dark anyway. We have the Bubonic Plague where one third of Europe dies. So have a good day. Starting off today with today's section on geography, I'm going to look at some of the capitals on the rivers. Now, most infamously, you have London on the Thames River. When you see the Thames River labeled on the map in the center. Moving on, then you have Paris on the Seine. The Seine River is one of the two major rivers in France. You have Prague on the Vltava. You have Moscow on the Moscow River, which is not pictured, as is Prague, and Budapest is on the Danube River. Berlin is on the Spree River. It's not on the Rhine, by the way. It's at a river between the Rhine and the Elbe. Rome is on the Tiber River, and Vienna is also on the Danube with Budapest. Now, if we look at the mountain ranges here, you'll see the Pyrenees Mountains. That's in between France and Spain. The Alps, which are on they're in Austria. Some of them go into southern Germany and also into Italy. You have the Carpathians, which is in the northern part of Romania. You have the Apennines, which is in Italy. The Caucasus Mountains, which really separates between the Caucasus and the Urals, they separate Asia and Europe. Climate and rainfall. Okay. Most of Sweden, Norway, and Finland have polar climates. You don't really have anything like Texas in Europe as far as heat. The part of Europe that I guess for racist reasons, even though you have white people in both parts, uh, you have much more of a marine west coast climate, so much better climate for just about everything in Western Europe. In Eastern Europe, you have a humid climate and it's not as hospitable. Then in the south, you have the Mediterranean climate for trade in the Mediterranean. The better parts of Europe, they get a lot more rain. England, on the one hand, you have France and parts of Norway. But some of the more barren areas, you have under 20 inches. So just to kind of give you an idea of what most of Europe looks like. And the rain is a little bit heavier as you get into Eastern Europe, what most people consider less civilized. You have the Benelux countries, Belgium, the Netherlands, and Luxembourg. Belgium's a relatively new country, about 200 years old. Uh, and then the Netherlands, which is a country that's below sea level, but they've survived mainly through their canals, through their dikes and dams. And the Netherlands are also known as Holland. The people there are called Dutch, and Amsterdam is its capital. And Luxembourg is a really small country. Uh, by the way, back to the Netherlands. They off the coast now. They have massive windmills that generate most of the power for all the people that live in the Netherlands. Germany's Black Forest. This is a gorgeous area of Germany. The food's pretty good. The people are really friendly. Uh, it's almost a different type of Germany than the North. It was in the western side, so much of it didn't change post World War II as far as culture or traditions or anything like that. Uh, East Germany was much more industrialized and it was controlled by the Soviets for the better part of 45 years. It's still in recovery today, but the Germans spent several trillion dollars trying to get it up to the standards of the West. Uh, the Norwegian fjords, these are massive glaciers that cut deep valleys into the ocean during the Ice Age, and it gives breathtaking views like this. Uh, you probably have a lot of screensavers that pop up from time to time if you have Windows-based TV or on your computer. It's basically the screensaver, a lot of them. Most of them are really beautiful. That's why I have one picture. Yeah, I get it. I get it. Okay, so industry and guilds. So, during this time period, you would learn from someone who was extremely skilled. Okay, so all the people that did the same jobs, they organized into business associations called guilds. They controlled prices. They controlled the how things were made, the methods of production, and also the quality that you had to provide. And basically, the people that are locally in charge of it are uh, they're what you would call a master. So you would go and you would work for them for free for quite some time, do anything they told you for about 5 to 7 years. And during that time, you would become an apprentice. And during that time, you would also learn how to make the better product, but it would take a long time before you got there. After you did that for a while, then you would become what was known as a journeyman. But before you could become a master, you had to produce a masterpiece of your own. And once you finished that, then you were also a master. Some people might never go from journeyman to master. Now, the Crusades. Uh, now, what had happened is there was a big threat. Uh, there was a big threat coming from the east, and that was in the form of Islam. So there were a lot of Muslims that had taken control of the Holy Land. So the Pope decided it would be a good idea to try and reconquer the land in the name of Christianity. There were a total of 8 military expeditions. The first 4 are the most famous. The last 4 are beyond failures. Okay, this takes place between 1096 and 1270. So the Seljuk Turks took control and closed all of the Holy Lands, which are Israel, uh, to all Jews and Christian pilgrims. Okay, so the emperor of the Byzantine Empire asked Pope Urban II for help, and a lot of what happens as a result of this, despite there's an initial success in taking back the Holy Land, but ultimately they lose that and they weaken the Byzantine Empire to the point where it will fall apart. So, uh, this was also an opportunity for anyone who had done anything wrong in their life to find redemption, because it was said that if you died fighting for the Holy Land, or if you died, after the Holy Land had won and you helped secure that, then you were forgiven and you could go to heaven. So, uh, the Holy Land, or Israel, the Christians, Jews, and Muslims all claimed Jerusalem, which was the capital of Israel in its early time. Uh, it's also for the Christians a place where Jesus was crucified and came back from the dead and went to heaven. The Jews said that it was theirs because it was given to them by God through Abraham, and Muslims also claim it through Abraham through the son of Ishmael, and it's also where Muhammad ascended into heaven to meet Allah. So this is a big important city, and Muslims had controlled it for almost 500 years by the time this happened. And for a long time, they had no problem letting anyone that wanted to come into the city to worship. But there'd be some problems with that. So the first crusade, okay, 10,000 people go in. It lasts for about 3 years. They attacked Jerusalem. They captured the city, and they killed everyone who was not a Christian. So if you were a Muslim or a Jew, they would kill you. And so they created four nations. Uh, they created four nations that were there, and this will last for almost 50 years. Okay, the Second Crusade, uh, it it really fails, and Jerusalem falls to the Muslim order under Saladin. The Third Crusade, Richard the Lionheart, who would later become the English king, negotiates an agreement letting Christian pilgrims go to Jerusalem. A lot of bloody battles that took place. In the Fourth Crusade, Christian forces went and they decided on their way down they were going to attack and sack Constantinople, the capital city of the Byzantine Empire. And so the Byzantine Empire will find a way to last for about another 250 years, but it's really the beginning of the end. Now, why did the Crusades matter? Well, one is all the new trade that comes as a result of this. New products come into Europe. Uh, all these cities in Italy become very important for trade, access to all of the Mediterranean. Feudalism becomes weaker as a result of this. Many nobles and knights left to go and fight. They sold some of some of their land so they'd have money to go and fight, and many serfs were given their freedom. Uh, do if you sent troops, it helped legitimize your reign. So a lot of kings of Europe became more powerful as a result. Due to all this increased trade, there's more use of money. So there's more of a standardized types of currency to be able to buy and trade. And all these ideas, cultures, and advancements from these different regions go and they cause a lot of changes in European society. And you can see the medieval trade routes. A lot of them went through Muslim-held territory. Okay, and they were all overland. I mean, there was one that went through the Persian Gulf, but it was not a very fast route in itself. So, so the papal monarchy. Okay, so at this point, the popes were the most powerful people in the world. I believe we mentioned that last time. Pope Gregory VII, he tried to uh, he tried to stop all these policies made by kings and queens throughout Europe to give positions in the church to people that were not members of the church. Okay, uh, so Henry IV, he fights him to try and get control of this, and they get together and they put together a treaty kind of between the German king and Pope Gregory VII called the Concordat of Worms, that they would work together, that they would have the kings would have some ability to appoint, but the pope the pope would have a certain control over the types of people that could be appointed. So they tried to keep people in the church. Pope Innocent III tried to rule Europe and he used the interdict to uh, to try and control the kings and queens. So if you were a any type of priest under the Pope and you were in a territory where they weren't doing everything that were to the satisfaction of the Pope, they would not give sacraments, or they might not forget. They might not let you confess your sins. You might not get communion. All these things were to try and get you to pressure your rulers to do whatever they wanted. Okay, there were several medical universities throughout Europe. During this time, it would be much better for you if you did not go to the doctor for the most part. The science was not very sound really until I wouldn't go to the doctor if you time travel until about 1940. Oxford University was established in the 12th century and one of the most famous universities in Europe. And as you can see, there were several universities that were founded uh, between 1200 and the 1500s. So between 1350 and 1317, there's a horrible famine that breaks out in Europe. Okay, uh, there were uh, there were these terrible climate changes, and for 3 years, crops failed. Okay, there was so much rain it basically rotted out the roots of all the crops, and about one out of every seven people died in some English villages. Okay, uh, because people were so hungry, it also made it easier for them to catch diseases, and about 75 million people would die in this 3 year period. So it's even worse than Corona, believe it or not. I mean, from what I heard, it was so bad that they didn't have any hot Cheetos to eat. I don't know how people eat those. Those are gross. And large people do it. Not just fat. I mean, like tall, like big people. Anyway, so the creation of Parliament. Edward III. Okay, he helped establish Parliament as a group or system to levy taxes. Okay, and he creates a House of Lords from the wealthiest people and the House of Commons from the people that had less money but were still extremely wealthy. And eventually, this group would rule all of England or Britain. France tried to do something similar. Okay, Philip the Sixth was able to work with their parliament called the Estates General, but it did not work in future generations of kings. Germany was hundreds and hundreds of small monarchies, and seven of the biggest rulers of Germany helped elect the Holy Roman Emperor, who was very, very weak. Now, I know what you're thinking. Everything is going to go well here. Well, remember, this is Earth, so things are going to go bad. I give you the bubonic plague. So, there were uh, no one really knew what caused the bubonic plague to begin with. Eventually, they would trace it to rats, the fleas on rats, and bacteria that were in the fleas. And this was one of the most devastating diseases in the history of mankind. About one out of every three people in Europe would die as a result of it. Okay? About the only place that was safe, oddly enough, was Poland. So, why? I could not explain that to you. But for the most part, everywhere else, no one was safe. So, the bubonic plague, the Black Plague, okay, this only has a 3 year cycle where it's killing off everyone. I mentioned earlier, cut down Europe's population by about 40%, or about 38 million people. Okay, about 3/5 of Europe's clergy, and the cities were about half as full as they were before. And a lot of people said that it was a punishment from God. Okay, uh, a lot of people thought that the Jews who weren't always getting as sick were responsible, and part of that had to do with the way they lived their lives. They were much cleaner people than a lot of other people in Europe. Now, what apparently did God want? He needed you to beat yourself. Okay, so you might take a whip and whip yourself in the back. Yeah, that sounds normal. Okay, and Uh, they did this to get God's help. I mean, it ended, so maybe it worked. I don't know. Uh, the disease is really introduced by Mongols during their invasion of Europe. Many times they would launch dead bodies into the cities, and that would help with the decay of the city and the spread of diseases that there weren't always cures for. So, what caused the bubonic plague? Well, let's look at what they said at the time. We know what really caused it today, but going back then, okay, Giovanni Boccaccio, he wrote a book called Decameron, and it said that the plague was because God was angry. By the way, some of the conditions you had, you might have a high fever, breathing constriction, you might have some swollen sores on your underarms and your crotch areas. Gangrene of the toes, fingers, lips, or nose, which is always good when those things fall off. Seizures and extreme exhaustion. Okay. Uh, Other people thought that it was earthquakes, that there were gases from the earth that caused everyone to die. And Hermann Giges said that the Jews poisoned all the wells, and they needed to be killed as a result of it. So don't think the Holocaust was the beginning of Jews suffering. It's just a different one. So as a result of the plague, you have a major decline in trade. There were very few workers, so people could charge more money to do work, and it gave them more options. Uh, there was less demand for food, and so the price of agriculture dropped tremendously. Okay, and for a short period, many would no longer be serfs anymore, and the wealthy would take back control, but there would be violent results from the peasants. Once again, we finished another day. I hope everyone's good. I hope I get to see you soon. I hope I get to have you all in person. That's why I do this. So, have a great day, and thank you, everybody.